Mike Trout here, and I want to do a talk as I'm driving home about something called the vicious cycle. The vicious cycle. And this is something that Noam Chomsky elaborates on. He has a whole documentary on the vicious cycle, how it came about, how it's, and what has it done to our global society. The vicious cycle is the wealth and power cycle that is driving globalization. And the vicious cycle is the thing that is driving inequality too. So everything that's happening, climate change, deforestation, the loss of our species, of the sixth great extinction that's happening right now. You could look at 40% of our ocean now has plastic on the surface, over 40%. We have over 1,000 dead zones in our ocean. Dead zones are where large amounts of bacteria basically are sucking the oxygen out of the ocean. These dead zones, basically nothing can live there. Our coral reefs are dying. And we've got some severe stuff headed our way, like the potential methane gas getting released, to name a few. Now, how do these all relate to something known as the vicious cycle? Well, they're all what Suzuki would call externalities. Externalities are basically the cost of doing business. Fracking poisons our water. Well, that's just an externality for us to make billions of dollars of keeping our gas cheap, fracking in the United States. Externalities. It is the cost of doing business. And the bottom line is, this cost is threatening everything. So, why should this be important to you? Well, really simple. Because if we do not stop the vicious cycle, we risk losing everything. That's right, we risk losing everything. So, how do we stop the vicious cycle? Well, what you need to ask yourself is, what is the fuel that powers it? What is the fuel that powers the vicious cycle? It's that simple question. And consider this. If we can replace the fuel that powers the vicious cycle, then ultimately we can change everything. I want to say that again. Simply by replacing the fuel of the vicious cycle, we change everything. Because the vicious cycle of wealth and power is driven by something. So by replacing that something, it ends the fuel that powers it and ultimately stops it. And when you stop it, what happens? Well, guess what? Inequality stops or gets better. Things start getting better. We stop losing as many species. The bees return. Our water, no longer is getting contaminated. Our beaches clean up. No longer is contaminated. All these externalities go away because they no longer become part of the vicious cycle of wealth and power generation. Okay, Mike, I know what you're saying. So how do we go about changing the fuel? Well, I'm glad you asked that because I do have the answer. So our entire model is built on something called capitalism. And the fuel that powers capitalism, or the vicious cycle, is what I call, very simply, the egocentric startup business model. And if you do know anything about startups, you know that startups is what creates jobs. You know startups is what creates investments. You know startups is basically the fuel that powers everything. Without startups, there is no growth. Without startups, there is no billion-dollar, political campaigns. Without startups, basically the whole system stops. But I know what you're saying. How can you, get rid of startups? Because then nothing. Well, here's the very exciting thing. There is a new business paradigm, or a new paradigm called the blockchain. The blockchain is built in the cloud, and it is developed on something known as Ethereum. So our value proposition is this: if we usher in a new kind of fuel. We'll call this fuel Found Ups. And this fuel can replace the startup, right, which is a centralized vehicle, and a Found Up is a decentralized, where the startup is an egocentric and the Found Up is egoless or selfless. Then ultimately we can change everything. That's right. So, how does it work? What does this new fuel look like, and how, why should I be involved and be part of it? Well, if you care about the planet, if you care about what's going on, you got to ask yourself, what am I willing to do to save it? And if there's a crazy dude called Mike Trout who says he has a solution, shouldn't we give that solution a chance? We may say, well, there's lots of solutions. Well, I have a white paper. I have thought this out very, very in detail, and you can read about it. Now, understand, there's some challenges for you. Number one is, you've got to spend some time and equate yourself to the blockchain paradigm, because if you don't understand the blockchain paradigm, and then ultimately what I write will be a bunch of buzzwords and goobly-goo. And that's what it's going to sound to you. Oh, I hear buzzwords, buzzwords, buzzwords. Decentralization, a buzzword, selfless, buzzword. Bottom up versus top down. All these are to you buzzwords. But they actually mean very specific things. So let's kind of talk about what Found Ups is and how does it work. Well, with something known as the blockchain, right, we can now introduce what I would simply call a headless fund, a hedge fund, headless, or a headless IRA, a headless fund that will power Found Ups globally, a headless fund that ultimately won't be run by me, won't be run by a group of aging white guys, but ultimately run by an autonomous agent that I call the Noodle, or you can call Core, right? That uses what I call validation and valuation metrics, and these metrics come from the form of likes, follows, share, and ultimate investments in Found Ups. And also things like securing IP and other things, which play a very, very big role in Found Ups. To decide the amount of funds, which is all autonomous, there's no one deciding about how these Found Ups launch. So ultimately, the first thing that we do with Found Ups is we remove the access to capital gatekeepers. Currently, startups are controlled by access to capital gatekeepers. They may be hedge funds, if it's on the VC level. They may be Y Combinator or Techstars or any of these other ones if they're on the what I call the C startup level. Or they could be friends, families, and fools if they're on the pre-seed. So the number one thing is we set up what's known as a DAO. Think of it as a decentralized IRA for launching innovation, right? And there is a token that you get in for investing in it called UPS. And these UPS, they start UPS, Found Ups. We are, upstarts, right? UPS. These UPS is our form of Bitcoin. So ultimately what you're doing is buying these UPS that then you're going to use these UPS to power or fuel Found Ups. And as the Found Up levels up, and there's 7 levels to a Found Up. The first 3 levels actually are very easy. Anyone can probably get to the first 3 levels. Level 4, level 5, level 6, and definitely level 7 are very, very challenging. Maybe not so much level 4. But the level 7 is when a Found Up does its OPO, which is our version of the IPO, which is an open public placement, which is the moment a Found Up ceases being a Found Up and becomes an actual entity. Now, this entity in our system can be one of 2 things. It could launch as its own DOA, which is its own fund, right? It breaks away and creates its own fund. Or it becomes a child of the existing fund, which it stays as part of. In something known as a DAO, there's ultimately the fund itself, and then there's ChildUp. It was known as child DAOs. Every found up launches and becomes a child DAO. And as this DAO levels up and then launches, what happens is if it becomes its own DAO, now you have two DAOs or two hedge funds launching even bigger projects. As those next level found ups level up and they launch, now you've got three DAOs funding even larger projects. And finally, again, it goes through the cycle. So every time there's an iteration of the cycle and a new found up in that new cycle launches, those found ups basically go from pre-seed to seed level start to seeded level starts, right? To even the next phase, which don't even exist right now. You're dealing with potential funds that will be in the trillions of dollars, all autonomously driven via an AI which is really no more sophisticated than the Google AI and Siri combined. AI that ultimately was developed as part of DARPA and everything else. So, how is this going to save our planet? How does it change and how does this fuel? Well, it's really simple. In found ups, every found up is governed by what's known as a smart contract, which basically defines how that found up will return its investments back to the DAO. Remember, that's the fund that launches everything. So, for example, in found ups, you can have a found up that is 100% net profit and capital gains back to the DAO. Or it may be 100% of net profits and only 20% of capital gains back to the DAO. Any sort of, the way you set up is completely up to the founder with his vision and how he wants it to go. Now, what does that mean? It means basically, instead of the money now going to a few stakeholders for them to go buy islands or for them just to be, to live in this what I consider this obesity, right, of wealth. Instead, what happens is the investment keeps snowballing, launching ever more found ups until every problem on our planet is solved. You see, the current selfish or the egocentric startup model is built on something called compounded annual growth rate, which is an endemically flawed idea that was developed during the Industrial Revolution for powering the Industrial Revolution to provide the incentive for aristocrat investors and others to participate in the growth of the Industrial Revolution. The problem is CAGR treats our planet as an infinite object, one that ultimately it will grow exponentially forever. Well, there's one problem with that. Our planet is a finite object with finite amount of resources, with a finite growth potential. And we're already consuming 20 times the number of planets. We are eating into our future generations, 20 generations down. And it's just a matter of time that we basically become what's known as our Ebola, the snake eating itself. And that's what's happening right now. The snake is eating itself. And the new age, and I think what the minds, I hate to get hokey with this, is the realization of this and the changing of this. The new Mayan calendar predicted found ups coming. The new Mayan calendar predicted basically a change in how we run things. So what happens all of a sudden is the vicious cycle ends. And instead of the vicious cycle, what I would call the selfless cycle begins. And individuals will be empowered to launch solutions they want to do without the requirement of closed capital networks to fuel them. My name is Mike Trout. There's a lot for you to basically digest in this talk here. There's a lot, and what can help you is for you to read my unofficial white paper, because I'm dyslexic, and I'm looking for folks who want to co-author and add their base and knowledge to it to write the official one on GitHub. But you can go to theselfishstartup.com. I'll say it again, theselfishstartup.com, and read it. And make sure you do listen and watch Requiem of the American Dream. cream of the American dream, watch Noam Chomsky. I watch this video every day, twice, 3 times a day. In my opinion, it's the most important video produced because ultimately it is the pain that we are going to remove with Bound-Ups. And that pain is the fuel that powers the vicious cycle, wealth and power. And by simply removing the fuel and changing it out from, you know, from selfish to selfless, we save the planet. It's that simple. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this talk. Sorry for the noise. I have a loud little car here, and hopefully I'm speaking loud enough that what I'm saying can be understood.